And thanks for inviting me up, Andrew. And good to see all you folks out here today. Few preliminary comments. Love the presentation so far. I apologize for being the first speaker today that was not wearing the proper T-shirt. There's a reason for that, and this has to do. Especially you younger folks here that get tired of learning parts of a speech and parts of a sentence and so forth. But I'm about to demonstrate to you the difference between a noun and an adjective. I have problems wearing novelty T-shirts, as my wife explained to me. She said, to wear a proper novelty T-shirt with print on it, you need big arms and a small stomach. I said, all we have to do is switch the nouns and the adjectives around a little bit there, and I qualify. I got the big stomach and the small arms. Anyway, nouns and adjectives. Terrific to be with you folks once again here today. And my topic today is gravitas, or substance, if you will. What does that mean, or what does that matter? There's a few things that, that I want to talk about today. And I'm going to be talking about 3 different generations of people. And what I'll be talking to you about is essentially what's happened in members, shall we say, of my own family. A couple things about this. First of all, from Psalm 15. Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle, who may dwell in your holy hill, he who walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. He who does not backbite with his tongue, nor does evil to his neighbor, nor does he take up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but he honors those who fear the Lord. He who swears to his own hurt and does not change. What does that mean, to swear to your own hurt and do not change? I think what's happening here, the psalmist is really describing a man of gravitas. A man of substance, someone that you want to know, someone that you want to be like, someone who is important, if you will, someone that you can learn from. I did become a pastor after a lot of years of frustration, shall we say. I did graduate from Bible college, but never really felt the need to rush into the pastorate, if you will. I was finally pushed into the pastorate, if you will, through the back door because I got tired of deprogramming my children from what they heard at my local church. I got tired of it. I couldn't do it anymore. So, well, okay, and I wasn't going to be that homeschool dad. I am a homeschool dad, but I wasn't going to be the homeschool dad to say, you know what, the only person qualified to be your pastor is your dad. No, they are different institutions for a reason. Your family and your church are not exactly the same thing. And I couldn't be a pastor in a mainstream church because I didn't have the skills. The skills to be a pastor of a mainstream church is like about a half and half divide. If you want to be a pastor in a mainstream church, you got to be 50% CEO and 50% game show host. If you can put those 2 categories together, you can be a pastor in most of today's local churches. And they're pretty much interchangeable with politicians also. If you can be a politician, you can probably be a pastor. If you be a pastor, you can probably be a politician in the mainstream churches. All that to say is that we don't take our pastors seriously anymore. Do you ever think about this? When you think of gravitas, do you think of a pastor? It's one of the last people you think of. What an absolute mess. I want to talk about that today. A man of gravitas is a man that does the right thing, usually starting with cost to himself. Usually starting with cost to himself. See, what happens is, and some men get the homeschool bug, they get bit by that, and the first thing he says, well, I'm going to get my family in line, right? And they line up their family a certain way to make them look better. And usually that doesn't work too well. What decision have you made as a man ever that cost you? I want to submit to you today that if you aren't making godly decisions that cost you, you're probably not a man of gravitas, if you will. I'm going to illustrate that here in a moment, but I want to read another passage very quickly from Proverbs chapter 24. These things also belong to the wise. It is not good to show partiality in judgment. He who says to the wicked, you are righteous, him the people will curse. Nations will abhor him. And here's my verse. But those who rebuke the wicked will have delight, and a good blessing will come upon them. I'm going to read that last verse again. Those who rebuke the wicked will have delight, and a good blessing will come upon them. That is gravitas, baby. Do you have the gravitas to rebuke the wicked? A good blessing will come upon you. Now, do you think that might cost the rebuker just a little bit? Maybe. Might cost him a lot, might cost him his life. We see these men in the Bible all the time. It cost them their lives. Gravitas. That's who these men were. So I want to give some illustrations here. Just think of Elijah, for example. Elijah just marches in. You ever remember how Elijah gets introduced to Ahab? It says Elijah the Tishbite. I don't even know what a Tishbite is. I don't know where the Tishbites come from. Never heard of Tish. I don't know. It says Elijah, I don't even says the prophet, one of the inhabitants of Israel, Elijah the Tishbite, said to Ahab, there will be no more rain here unless I say so. Ahab was an extremely powerful king. That little statement to Ahab cost Elijah pretty much most of the comfort of his life. Pretty much. He did have some good days. Mount Carmel was a good day in the hood if you're Elijah. That was that's one of those days when it was good to be a prophet. Most of the time it was not good to be a prophet. That was a good day in the prophet business. John the Baptist, he rebuked that wicked King Herod. Said, you cannot have your brother's wife. Of course, Herod says, who are you? Matt, you and I, of course, we did Pastor Matt Kenitzer, not an actor, but he's a very courageous man. And he and I actually did at one point, a brief skit on John the Baptist being a two-kingdom guy. And it was a lot of fun. I got to be Herod, and John comes and rebukes me for taking my brother's wife. And I said, hey, John, that's nice for you in your lane, in your area, but I'm Herod here, and you have nothing to do with me. And of course, John is no two-kingdom guy. Herod, doesn't matter who he's in charge of, he doesn't get to take his brother's wife because there's a God who says no. Cost him his head. Gravitas. Mordecai. I want to talk about him a little bit later with my dad probably won't have time for it, but Mordecai. There's a guy think of him. He subjected the entire nation in Persia to destruction because he wouldn't bow to Haman. Gravitas, maybe? I used to wonder about that, and I'll be talking about my dad here very briefly in a few moments. But I said to my dad one time, what in the world? It's not that he wasn't allowed to bow to people. Godly people bowed to rulers all the time. Why won't he bow to Haman? And my dad said, you know what? Haman was an Agagite, which means he was the descendant of King Agag. And God had said he would have war with Amalek forever and ever, from generation to generation. You cannot show those people any respect. And for that detail by Mordecai, a man of gravitas, he is not bowing to Haman, and he subjected the entire nation. It wasn't just costing him, the entire nation, to potential destruction. But he wasn't going to bow because God had told him not to do that. Can you imagine? We don't have them up here, but the three men in the fire, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Can you imagine the talks nowadays? They looked like men of gravitas, right? But there were 70 people that got taken from Israel, so 66 that bow, right? And can you imagine the conversations? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, listen, God knows your heart. Come on, we don't even have to use our imagination. We're all here in 2024, right? God knows your heart. Come on, look at what you're giving up. And they go and they speak to They go and they speak to Nebuchadnezzar. Said, here's what we know, here's what we don't know. We don't know if God's going to deliver us, but we do know that he can. And here's something else that we really, really do know. That whatever happens, we're not bowing down to that image. That you need to know. Gravitas. Moses could have had a pretty good life, right? A real good life. But he chooses the approval of God over the pleasures of sin for a season. It cost him. All these men here that we talked about, that you see on the screen, they made decisions that cost them because it was the right thing to do. So it's funny how we talk about what being a man is. My definition of a man is a man who does the right thing when it costs. Anybody can do the right thing when it doesn't cost them. Try doing the right thing when it does cost you. Well, I'm going to talk today about the heritage that I was born into. And so from here on in, it'll be stories, if you will. And I'll try to make these pretty quick. This window that you see here, the stained glass window you see behind me, it's up there for a reason. My grandfather made that window. If you ever get down to the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., which is completely woke now, I'm sure, that window still stands. It's the rose window. It's the most prominent window in the National Cathedral, and it was done by my grandfather. He loved art. He loved stained glass. He loved that stuff. I have a book that he wrote about stained glass. I have it at home. I read it every night. No, I've never cracked it, never opened it up. It's stained glass. I don't know. If you look at the window, it's really precise. It's difficult. A lot of circles in this kind of art, stained glass, to keep things in perspective. It's difficult when you're working with lines that aren't too straight. Well, what happened to him was, and again, this has nothing to do with me. I was just fortunate enough to be born into this heritage. And I hope every one of you here, with your children that are born into a heritage like this, and your grandchildren, because I'm going to talk about the heritage that I was born into. I had nothing to do with it. My grandfather loved stained glass. When he was 18 or 19, there were people that noticed his talent and his ability, and they offered to send him to Europe to study the masters. Well, for a young man who's into stained glass, where did he go to study the masters, right? Hint, not to Uruguay. No, of course you're going to Europe, right? And so he wanted to do this, and said, yeah, you can do it. You have to take some courses. I have to take some courses. Great, I can't wait to take the courses on stained glass is what I want to do. And when he looked over his courses, one of the courses that he had to do was he had to study nudes, had to study naked people. And he believed that the Bible told him that he cannot do that. That's not art. And he had to give it up. He gave up the entire scholarship. And it broke his heart. He was very artsy kind of a guy. Growing up, the stories about my grandfather, he was an artist, all right. And then we all understood that joke about the difference between an artist and a park bench. You've probably heard, maybe not, difference between an artist and a park bench. Park bench can support a family of 4. We all understood that joke because my grandfather was very, very artsy. It was all about art. But this broke his heart that he couldn't go to and study the masters when he go to Europe. And he wouldn't back down. He just wouldn't do it. And again, he was like 18 or 19 at the time. And since he wouldn't back down, guess what? In this case, the people offering the scholarship came back and said, you know what? You don't have to take that course. We'll send you anyway. And they did. When he was there, he discovered a lost recipe for the color red while he was there. So again, that's pretty cool heritage to be born into. That's a man of gravitas, my grandfather there. I want to talk about my own father. My own father, which has a tremendous effect on me. Some of you have heard this story before. I'll try to make it very, very quick. This happened when I was extremely young. My father was an elder in a church, And one day the pastor comes to the elders and tells all the elders except for one. And he says, well, you know, the one elder that's not here, he's involved in an adulterous affair. And, okay. Now, you can't tell anybody because he swore me to secrecy. You can kind of say we already have a problem, right? This is kind of already off the rails. Okay, well, that's the way it is. I'm dealing with it, Pastor, you know. Well, next time my father sees this elder who's in adultery, he won't shake his hand. My dad could never do that, right? Like, how's the wife? How's the kids? Yo. Well, now that elder knows that the pastor broke his confidence with the other elders. So that elder goes back and he complains to the pastor, said, hey, you know, Dave Saint found out. You must have told him. Well, now the pastor has a decision to make. All you people that have been thrown out of churches, you know where this is going, or had to leave for the dumbest reasons. You know exactly where this is headed. Now the pastor has to make a decision. Do I go with the guy who's committing adultery right now? Or do I go with the guy who won't shake hands with the guy committing adultery right now? What decision does the pastor make on that one? Well, what happened to my dad was that he worked for a company and the pastor had a lot of influence within the company. There was a big meeting, it all came out. And I'm super proud of my dad for doing this, a man of gravitas. Because in this meeting, this man said, but I really love this woman. I'm in love with her. And that was supposed to solve everything. And my dad looked him straight in the face in the meeting. This is not done over the phone. It's not done by letter. Straight in the face. And said, that's not love, it's lust. Gravitas. My dad had his salary cut in half. They're trying to get him to leave without firing him. He didn't leave. The company eventually made it good to him, made it up with him and more after the pastor died. Oh yeah, one other item. The pastor that took up for the adulterer, it was about 15 years later, he himself was caught in the act and died shortly thereafter. My dad wouldn't have known that at the time. I was born into that heritage. May your children be born into a heritage like that because you have done the right thing when it cost you. So remember, maybe 4 or 5 years old, I was very young. This is my second story here. We were down in Philadelphia picking up my uncle who was flying in. I was so young. I did not understand this till years later. A prostitute approached my dad. I didn't know what she was. I didn't know any of this stuff. And she approached my father. I saw this whole thing. And she says, Uncle George, I haven't seen you for such a long time. And my dad shot right back. I'm not Uncle George. You know, how many men would enjoy the little flirtatious yeah for just a moment? Even faithful men, just enjoy the attention there for a little bit. My father would have none of it. Hit the road. Gravitas. One thing my father did, he was a tremendous, he was an inventor and an artist. He wasn't married till he was 31. When he got married, he loved art. He did sculpting. We still have some of his work. He could make a bust of anybody's heads here and look exactly like you out of clay. He knew what he was doing. He could do your whole body of a person. He was really, really good. But you know what he did when he started a family? He knew that he could not support his family on his art. And he gave up his art to support his family. Gravitas. Make it a decision that costs you because it's the right thing to do. Another thing about my dad was he taught me. We read the Bible every night. And he wasn't so good at explaining it all the time. While we were doing our family devotions, he didn't talk about it much, but there were other times I just wanted to talk to him and find out what he believed about certain things. And he'd make a comment about maybe the world, and he would say, if we believe the Bible, we wouldn't have this particular problem. And he grew up in dispensationalism, but he actually thought it was actually one book, the Bible, not two. The irrelevant Old Testament and the relevant New Testament with the hyper-relevant parts, words of Christ in red, of course, right? How many times have you heard say, well, Jesus never did something? Well, there's a lot of things that Jesus didn't do, like get married. Amazing that we have this nonsense going on. We have the entire Word of God, okay? Genesis to Revelation. Let's believe all of it. My dad did. And he would sometimes say, we have this particular problem because we don't believe the Bible. Well, that's a dad who's pointing out to me the relevance of the Bible. We weren't just reading it because we have some kind of religious ritual to go through at night. No, we're reading it because it tells us how to live. And he would tell me these things about how it was supposed to be. I still remember him talking about the fugitive slave law in the Old Testament. Right? The slave that runs away, can't give him back, can't do it. And my dad pointing out to us that just that one law would have saved us so much trouble and so much bloodshed in this nation if we would have gone by that. Yeah, he read the Word and he taught it. But it wasn't just the Word, because he was an inventor and an artist also. One day I asked my dad, and this is just more of an anecdote, but he used to walk to work every day. And one day I asked him, I said, Dad, how do you invent things? I don't get invention. What do you mean by it? The thing doesn't exist. So how do you make it? How does it even work? And my dad said, because he understood nature and he understood the Bible so well, he said, actually, I don't invent anything. I'm like, yeah, you do. You got all these patents and stuff. If you want to know what it was, my dad's main invention was the baby wind-up swing. That was his invention back before batteries and stuff. Anyway, he said, no, we don't invent. He said, what we do is we copy. So we copy what God has already done. And he went on to say, you know what? If you can see it in nature, you can probably redo it. But if it's not in nature, you're probably barking up the wrong tree. It's probably not going to work. What a cool thing for me to have a dad like that to be able to talk to be able to teach me these things. What a wonderful thing. Well, there's lots more. He made a decision that cost me one time, but it wasn't wrong. I had gone to my dad. My father hated public education in the 60s. He was a hater back then. And I remember a couple of quick stories about that real quick. I remember there's a real popular psychology teacher, and I wanted to take psychology from this teacher because I went to Christian school. It was a Mennonite school for 8 years. It was the only game in town before homeschool. And so where there was no other school to go to, really, my dad said, well, it's off to Mennonite school with you and all your brothers and sisters. It's not public school, which is horrible. And the Mennonite school actually was pretty good. Anyway, but then they only went up to a certain grade, so then I found myself in public high school, if you can call it school, before going back to a different Christian school as a senior in high school. Well, it was like 11th grade. Dad, I want to take psychology. And so my dad, being a thoroughgoing thinker, says, so what's psychology anyway? What is that? What is it? What's it about? I must have said something like, well, it's about how people behave, about how people act. And my dad goes, He says, what do they think they know about like total depravity? And I said, probably not much. And he says, well, how can they possibly teach you anything about human behavior if they don't even understand that? So it's no psychology for you, bro. After that, I also played soccer, and our team got to be pretty good. I wasn't that much of a help to it, but when I was between my junior and senior year, my dad came to me and said, you know what? In your life, Joel, you're either going to be the influencer or the influencee. That's the way it's going to happen. And right now, I see you as a big shot in high school, but you're not the one doing the influencing. You're the one being influenced. Out. Wasn't quite like that. But I was out, and the next thing you know, I was in a different Christian school. Now, that was a decision that maybe cost me a little bit, but that was my father. He was convicted about the Word of God and what it taught. And he wasn't a compromiser with it at all. Much more I could say about that. I want to switch to the next generation, and this here is going to be my last quick story. I'd love to tell more stories about how my father taught me. I still remember going to him one time and saying, "What's with Isaiah? What happened?" Isaiah 6. That Isaiah sees the Lord high and lifted up, and his train fills the temple. And Isaiah says, God says, "Who will go for us?" And Isaiah says, here am I, send me. And we love this at the missions conferences, right? Here am I, send me. And after that, it was kind of a quick answer from Isaiah. And God says, Isaiah says, what's my job? And God says, go and tell these people that they're in big trouble. Big, big trouble. And then what happens is Isaiah says, which I would have said, I should have said this before, how long? Right? Weekend? Afternoon? And then God says, until the people are carried away. There's no left. I said to my dad, God just told Isaiah that his job wasn't going to work. He just told him. Why is he giving him the job at all? No one's going to listen. And my dad, again, being a thoroughgoing biblical scholar, said this. He said, at least when they got carried away, they'd have a signpost. See, this is the kind of thing I was able to learn from my father. A Gravitas man. And I don't think I could have learned these things if he wouldn't have been the kind of man that made the tough decisions that cost him early on. I think I'm out of time.
We have a few minutes for the any feedback, questions, or I have some questions there. Would anybody like to say anything? Okay. What can an older boy, Joel, who's maybe 10 to 15 years old, start to do to develop a manly disposition that will earn him respect among adults?
One thing you can do is he can start doing what adults do. You say 10 to 15? Yeah, around that. Yeah. We have created this thing called the teen years, which are these kind of thing where you put the kid on the shelf, and he's no good for anything until he's not a teenager anymore. How many of you are familiar with the Little House series? Some of you are. Do you remember Kip and Almanzo in that story about the long winter? They were like 13 and 14. They were very young, and they did what men do. They went themselves and they saved the entire little mini colony there at ages 13 and 14. We are selling our teenagers so short. The first thing you can do is do what men do. You can do it. It wasn't that long ago in the colonial period where 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds were accepted in adult settings because they could do what adults could do, and they could converse with them. I really want to see those days again. So first, do what adults do, and then learn what adults know. And you'd be surprised, even in the church, 12, 13-year-old conversations with adults. It is the best learning you can possibly do, because a companion of fools will be destroyed. That's the short answer.
On that note, then,
I was going to jump in on that. Earn the respect of men by demonstrating gravitas. Can also get you in trouble, right? Because just this week in one of my jobs, working at a hospital, encountered a problem, and it's a multifaceted, ongoing problem, and addressed it in a Christian way to multiple layers of leadership, and multiple ears heard it, and it doesn't go unnoticed, right? So I get this kind of scathing email review of me pointing out this egregious error, and it's basically saying, "Don't bring this up again." And it's one of those things where bring it up again, I might be out of a job, right?
Right.
So I have to decide how important is it to push this issue. You just gotta be careful when you're if you live like this, you got to be ready for the ramifications. Like you said, cost to self, right?
Yeah.
Doing the right thing.
Cost yourself, yeah. I often wonder if Mordecai really knew what he was in store for. I don't know. He was around the court, so he must have known how these things work sometimes. But he was going to do the right thing anyway, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And we always focus on them while they did the right thing. But what about those other guys that had to have been counseling them differently? What about all of them? Yeah, this is
The challenge to leadership when a lesser guy says, "Hey, man, you're not doing this."
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that happened during COVID in the churches. The sheep were going to the shepherds and say, "We want to be a flock." Something wrong with this picture.
That's a problem. All right. Very good.
Thank you.